There is no nation, there is no state in the history of the world, in my opinion, that has enjoyed white supremacy and white privilege more than France.
Terrence, I want you to address another thing. There's another book, which this one is written by a Frenchman, and I want to reference this because I want you to talk about that. Then I want to bring its relevance into what is going on in our territory, because what is going on in Ambazonia and what the French, the Cameroon government, and foreign partners are repeating are exactly what happened in Rwanda. There is a story about a French writer who also wrote a book talking about after he heard. I want you to tell that story where he read a transcript talking about genocide on both sides, please.
Well, the name of the French writer is I may not get the last name correctly, but I'm gonna read the full name and then I'll refer to him by his first name only, which is easier to pronounce. The name of the writer is Patrick de Saint-Exupéry. The book he wrote is called L'Inavouable, La France au Rwanda. He had covered the Rwanda tragedy as a reporter for Le Figaro, which is a French paper. And the reason why he wrote this particular book, as he states, is that this was about close to 10 years after the genocide. He was in Moscow, reporting from Moscow. And one day he was, one of those cold winter in Moscow. He was listening to the radio and he heard the then foreign minister of France, Dominique de Villepin, made a statement and talked about les génocides. Not le, but les génocides. So a genocide with an S. Obviously implying that there were two genocides in Rwanda. Obviously the one committed by the Hutu, the allies of France, that the French themselves have acknowledged that they have some responsibility for. And then the claim, the narrative they were trying to elevate was that the Tutsis also carried out a genocide against the Hutu as they defeated them, So he was, because he had covered the tragedy in Rwanda and understood the role that the French government had played, he was incensed by this attempt to change the narrative and start talking about two genocides instead of what the world knows as the genocide carried out by the Hutu-dominated government. He had also mentioned in this book that it wasn't the first time that he had noticed that the French were trying to introduce this narrative of two genocides, So basically, so at the end of the day, what the French were trying to do were trying to equate their responsibility in the genocide of the Hutus to the responsibility of quote-unquote the Anglo-Saxons that they felt were sympathetic to the RPF and the RPF. There's one point before I continue on this thread, there's one point we really need to make regarding the RPF. The executive committee of the RPF had more Hutu members than Tutsi members. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's just, so I want to have that background. Because the government in Kigali was a totalitarian government, and Hutus who were not buying into the Hutu power philosophy were also targeted. So you had a lot of Hutus who were in exile, who were part of the political opposition as well, So going back to Patrick's book, he had said that in, I think, November of 1994, so that's just a few months after the genocide had taken place, there was one of these France-Afrique summits in France. At that time, Mitterrand was still the president. Mitterrand was heavily involved. I'm sure you remember his quote, that in places like this, the genocide is not important.
Yes, in places like, let me just repeat it, in places like Africa, genocide is not important. So you can cause genocides and get away with.
Yes. So he said in that conference, I think it took place in November of 1994, Francois Mitterrand had given a speech, and obviously he could not avoid addressing what was then the news of the day in Rwanda being part of the Francophonie and all of that stuff, this France-Africa summit. And he talked about the genocide in Rwanda. But what happened was that usually when they make these speeches, there is a written transcript of the speeches that is given to reporters, So when he got his copy of the written transcript of the speech that Mitterrand had just given, where he talked about the Rwandan genocide, there was an S after genocide. And so when they went to the press conference, he asked Mitterrand, what do you mean by genocide? You know what I'm saying? So ultimately, the reason he wrote the book was because he had noticed that it seems as if there was a concerted effort within French officialdom to rewrite history.
The reason why I wanted you to talk about this French writer and him talking about two genocides is because, if you noticed, on November 30, 2017, it was La République that declared war on us, sent battalions of troops to go and burn villages, to go and kill at will, kill babies, kill old people, put over 60,000 into refugee camps in Nigeria, dispersed about 1 million hanging around in bushes and in La République du Cameroon, being robbed every day. And somehow they are able to convince the international community to be talking about violence on both sides. Can you believe that? Is it not the same as genocides on both sides?
Yes, the same narrative, and it's very unfortunate that some people repeat that. This reminds me of when Michel Bachelet went to Cameroon. I think it was May of last year, and came out with this, what I would consider a very dishonest, communique, where he talked about how, and what she did in her communique was basically isolate what she called the separatists and put all of the blame on them. I have part of the communique which I'll read. She talks about welcoming Cameroon's willingness to cooperate to tackle human rights crisis. So he calls it a human rights crisis. She calls it a human rights crisis. So right there and then, she's undermining the gravity of the situation, right? Trying to set the stage to create this moral equivalency, right? This is what she offered in that her press release, that to provide advice and assistance to the government, similar to that being provided to the G5 forces in the Sahel, to help ensure that military operations are in compliance with international human rights standards and violations are prevented when military forces are engaged in counter-terrorism operations and combat against armed groups. So that's the way she's phrasing what is happening in Cameroon, okay? And then she goes, further to state the following. The High Commissioner said that she utterly condemned the targeting of civilians by all armed groups, as well as the torching of schools and medical facilities by separatist groups in the Northwest and Southwest province. So you have a state party that is engaged in a war against what they consider a segment of their population, right? They have all the machinery of the state, the military, the police, in the case of Cameroon, gendarmerie, intelligence, the backing of France. They've explicitly stated that. And the UN High Commissioner goes and talks about all armed groups, So yes, this is part of that narrative that they are trying to create this moral equivalency, not unlike what François Mitterrand and Dominique de Villepin, when they started talking about two genocides. But we are trying to highlight these early warning signs that we've talked about in the beginning, So so that people like Michelle Bachelet will have no place to hide if the outcome in Amazonia is more tragic than it already is, you know. And those who are promoting this idea of a moral equivalency between a state that decided to attack another state, claiming to be part of its territory, and farmers, Okada drivers, and others who decided to defend themselves. You know, so it's very important that we bring this out in the manner in which, you know, you've elicited me to bring it out.
Well, I'm very happy you took the time to help our people understand what they're facing. They're facing a world that some members of that world have said Africa needs to be kept underdeveloped and impoverished.
Sub-Saharan Africa has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow Sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep Sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap.
And so any villain who comes out with an agenda to destroy his own people and recruit very ignorant male... the reason I'm saying ignorant is because I was looking at a thing where La Republique is trying to recruit more soldiers, and the qualification to be a soldier is first school living certificate. And these are people that you can, first of all, they're poor, they're destitute, and so you can now, instead of helping these people, you take and put arms in their hands, they go and get killed, or they kill their own. And so it helps that international conspiracy to keep Africa underpopulated and impoverished, so that they should be producing raw material for the rest of the world. It's expanding this, but it's expanding what we're talking about when I start mentioning this. But if you look at it, it is part of a white supremacist treatment of Africa, that nobody really cares to listen to the story. Nobody pays. You have to care enough to actually find out what's going on. If you don't care enough, you wouldn't even care to find out what's going on. You would just say, oh, are you the chief? Yeah, so you need a gun to take control of your people? Absolutely. And then they give Paul Biya, and Paul Biya writes a script for Michelle Bachelet, and she goes and reads it. And that's why this thing has continued with no... an international crime is being committed in Amazonia, and there's no international community to listen to. But if it was happening where the French want something to be done, like in Ivory Coast, where there was a legitimate government put in place and re-elected by the people, and they refused to take a look at the evidence that Gbagbo was putting up, and they invited the French, invited the Nigerians, brought in the UN and all the pounds on this little African country, and kicked out their hero. So you see how all of these things are really coming together. Terrence, I want to ask you this, and I think I've asked you this question before. I don't think you have an answer to it, but I just want to. It seems to me that there needs to be more morality, and that the world is growing past some of these draconian analysis and decisions that are made. Do you think, because like I keep saying, since last summer, I think the death of George Floyd has definitely changed attitudes in America, if only on the surface. But I go into very responsible offices, government offices, corporate offices, I see Black Lives Matter. And what that means is that, and I want to say that these corporations are actually putting money behind when they say that. They're actually changing policy. You think the international community will start expanding the meaning of Black lives, including African lives, matter, and therefore the UN and its human rights organizations and the corporate involvement in Africa would start being a little more rational and reasonable in its treatment of Africans, and not just the establishment, that makes the environment prepare for them to harvest whatever they want.
Yes, I think that is bound to happen. But if we want to accelerate that process, we have to be, very, very insistent. We have to be very defiant in the pursuit of our humanity. It took the slaves 400 years to dismantle that economic system that was dependent on free Negro or African labor to propel wealth for others. As you stated, they want to maintain that system, especially on the continent, to keep it impoverished, as has been recently stated out explicitly. But what I want to add to this is that it wasn't too long ago that, and I think I've mentioned this before, that, the African American had the right to vote in 1965. So it took them that long. But still, this country and this world needed a Black Lives Matter movement, as you stated. Black Lives Matter came about when there was a black president as president of the United States. So having a black person doesn't change the institutional setup, the systemic problems about racism and so on. To take it further, though, I want to say that there is no nation, there's no state in the history of the world, in my opinion, that has enjoyed white supremacy and white privilege more than France. And starting from when they were kicked out of Haiti, and they forced the Haitians to pay them for being decolonized. France could not have done that without the solidarity of the Western world. And the legacy of that solidarity in white supremacy and white privilege is still telling on the Haitian people. We saw that in Africa with the establishment of this slave currency called the CFA franc. We saw that in one particular case with the killing of Olympio in Togo when he tried to disengage himself from this process. We've seen that over the years with the crimes that they've gotten away with the Rwandan genocide, with their involvement in the Pool region of the Congo-Brazzaville, with their involvement in Cote d'Ivoire, with their involvement in Libya, which was unfortunately backed by NATO and the entire Western system. They have successfully been able to play the role of the white supremacist and the privileges of being white and European to get away with murder. This is something that we really, really need to bring to the light in our advocacy efforts all around the world, and especially in the United States of America. I don't think any Ambazonian or any American of Ambazonian origin should not go into any office, to any stakeholder, without being able to explain what the French have done to Africa. The systems they continue to have in place, such as the CFA franc, such as military bases, such as their involvement in genocides and massacres, going back to the 60s in Cameroon, in Algeria, in Madagascar, and all of these other places. They have done it with impunity, and at some point it has to stop. Yes, Black Lives Matter, and those blacks also are Africans.
It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight.